Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming back from lunch. I hope you had a nice lunch. I would like to start the first plenary session of this afternoon. Its title is Creating a Global Innovation Agenda. The purpose is to bring together the main findings, insights and recommendations from the 7 deep dive sessions that took place yesterday. So we had the future grid, storage and EVs, science to innovation, electric highways, market design, modeling and planning, and reliability and quality. I will start by asking Andreas Kremer to provide an overview. Andreas, please, the floor is yours.
So, thank you, Dolph. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the difficult task of summarizing parallel sessions for a full day in about 8 minutes on 7 slides. Bear with me. This is what the slides look like, and they all look the same. They all have 3 columns. And I'll start with the right column, role of international cooperation, because essentially what you will see there is always the same. There are very few things that are useful in relation to any type of innovation in any area. And the first one there is the best practice sharing. There is international cooperation can result in larger markets and can allow for the reaping of economies of scale. Sharing of information can lead to the harmonization of policies, of standards, of approaches. Standardization itself, technical standardization, comes up quite often as one way in which international cooperation can help, all the way to policy learning and policy coordination at a regional scale. There's also a technical aspect there that you will see interconnections, market integration, economic integration among neighboring countries, all the way to interoperability as a challenge of the technical side. In the middle column, on all of those view foils, you have the constituency that should feel the impact. Now, they vary depending on what we're talking about, but you will see utilities, grid operators, you will see power users in poor areas, in rich areas, industrial power users. There are a variety of people. Most of them are beneficiaries because we're always thinking about who will be benefiting from the renewable energy and energy efficiency and smart grid technologies. But in some cases, you will also see losers. You will see those who will be disrupted. As in this case, in mature systems, mini-grid developments may kill supergrids. Whether or not that's true, but there is, of course, you will find that in that column. So the most interesting column, so to speak, the one with the largest variety of topics, and that is what I want to focus on for the rest of the view files, is always in the first column. And here, in relation to future grid, smart grid, and microgrids, there are a number of, the highlight focuses on just 4 areas: the virtual generator capacity of a battery with so many cycles and response that there is an emerging of generator capacity and battery capacity in the grid. The new grid services and communication services that can be provided in smart grids, all the way to real-time controlling it changes the thinking. Microgrids are infrastructure, subordinate structure nested within connected grids as one of the innovation dynamics. So that is what the group produced as a summary of the deep dive session 1 on future grids and smart mini and microgrids. And like that, it goes through the other sessions. The second one, energy storage and electric vehicles. It's a convention to put those things together. They don't need to be put together, but we did. And here you see that there is the exciting developments are the multiplication of electricity storage systems of different philosophies, concepts. The a whole change in the paradigm about mobility, looking at low carbon and eventually based on renewable electric mobility as a transformation that is happening in the transport sector that will have an impact on the transformation of our energy systems as a whole. As a consequence, we get complete new business models in the transport sector. They will change the way in which cars are used, owned, leased, or whatever else. So you have innovation dynamics in the transport sector that will play back through the smart grid technologies into the renewable energy space. So, from science to innovation, ladies and gentlemen, there is no particular order in these slides. All the parallel deep dive sessions, they didn't build on one another, so it jumps a little bit. The thing here is that when you look at patenting, you see a growth of patents in the smart grid, in the ICT technology area, whereas patents in relation to energy generation technologies are leveling off. They don't see much patenting. No growth in patenting activities in that area, so there's a shift of attention towards these technologies. And you can see some examples of what is going on there in that space. It is very exciting, but it is a narrowing of science. This is a very technological approach and doesn't take account of a wider definition of innovation. Now, if you can make sense of all the abbreviations in the first column, then you're probably a friend of the supergrid. If you can't make sense of all the abbreviations in the first column, then rest assured the supergrid is in good hands. But seriously, there is a great innovative space there, a lot of dynamism, and it is resulting in higher operational flexibility, greater security of supply, greater resilience and reliability of the systems, and a higher utilization of the transmission corridors. So here, suddenly, the middle column of the constituents is no longer describing constituencies, but is describing an improvement that is of benefit to everybody. So the constituency is everybody who is in some way reliant on grid-supplied electricity. New market designs, a very different type of innovation, you will agree. But here again, the group starts with new market designs are enabled by developments in ICT technology, smart systems, which allow for greater participation in the market all the way to this word prosumers. But in order to do that, or they satisfy a need for flexibility, they create a need and they enable the supply of diversified products. They need and they enable the right price signals to occur. So there are a number of interconnections between those innovations that were discussed in that working group. And you can read the rest of them yourself. And again, you see that the constituencies that have the benefits, they vary. Mature systems are affected differently to emerging systems. We need to differentiate. But again, the constituencies are everybody who is served by one or the other type of these networks. Energy system modeling and planning, again, a very different activity, benefiting from an increased computational capability. That is pretty obvious, but it allows us now to model much more accurately with much higher resolution, much quicker in real time in many cases, forecasting different scenarios in real time in order to support decision making. All of those things are really enabled by innovations in the ICT sector, but not only there in a technical innovation, but it's also software innovation, system new approaches and system integration. So it allows new ways of communicating in the industry, but it also allows for new ways for the industry to communicate with stakeholders or with policy planners. The last one is the advancing frontiers of reliability and quality. Again, a beautiful acronym. What is it? The International Electrotechnical Commission Scheme on Renewable Energies. As one of the places where reliability and quality of material, of hardware, as well as other things are being discussed. Here again, the idea is that if quality is improved, the beneficiaries will be everybody, global. Everybody will benefit from better standards, from better interoperability, more reliability, and so on. So when you look at step back and you say, what have we learned from the deep dive sessions, then a lot of the discussion focused on technical, but the implications are always for the system management and for the regulators and the policymakers. The last column on international cooperation is clearly captures what IRENA might be able to do or what IRENA might enable others to do in partnership in order to make sure that the benefits of the innovation are shared internationally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for that concise overview. What we will do as a next step is ask 5 of the moderators to provide us their possibly additional concise comments on the outcome of the discussions. If we take them in order and start with the mini and microgrids. So the moderator for that group was Alexander Udalov. Where are you? Okay. Anybody else who wants to comment on the outcomes of this discussion? Mark.
I think maybe one key thing that came out was the fact that this is a fast-moving. A key thing that came out was that this is a fast-moving field, so that there seemed to be space to get compilations of lessons learned. Some of the early movers, people had noted, had made mistakes, and to not replicate those mistakes in policy would be really important. So, for example, creating enough free space for project developers to go ahead and do their thing without necessarily being unduly constrained by tariff setting at a national level, for example, especially in the context of developing countries. That was something that came out. So there was this thought that perhaps compiling these lists of lessons learned and updating them at a semi-regular basis would be valuable, as it's such a new area. Maybe the other point to put forward was simply that your recent studies point out that electrifying Africa, which will involve mini grids in particular, estimates are that you're looking at over $1 trillion worth of money flows over the next 20 years, which means it's a big market. So the imperative to get this right is strong.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any other pressing comments on this? I see none. Let's move on. On the energy storage and electric vehicles, is Professor Altenburg in the room? Please. You need a microphone? Okay.
Thank you. I don't have much to add to the excellent summary. What I found particularly interesting is with regard to the electric vehicles, that there's a long debate whether the whole electric vehicle thing is a big hype or it was a hype a few years ago, and now many people are disappointed because we still don't see electric vehicles on the street. But what became quite clear is that the cost regression has improved so much, and that we can be sure that within a very short period, the uptake of electric and hybrid vehicles will be enormous. And I think that's a very positive message in a way. And with regard to the grids, I mean, what came out very clearly is that energy storage, with regard to energy storage, there's such a multiplicity of different technologies. And they're all interdependent, and you really need systemic solutions that are very context-specific. And I think that this is something we really need to work on. And the final comment that maybe is a bit across all the working groups, the role of international cooperation. I think it's a bit under-ambitious to just say what we need to do is share good practices and inform policymakers and agree on standards. If we see the agenda of deep decarbonization within 30, 40 years, I think we need to have much stronger international engagement in terms of international research funding, for example. And I see energy storage, for example, as one of the key issues where we really need to think about kind of mission types of innovation and really organize big money from global funds, etc., to jointly drive this thing. And like, for example, in agricultural research, since the 1970s, we have the CGIAR, which is a consultative group on agricultural research. It's a global initiative that drives the global agricultural research agenda. I think that kind of settings we also need for things like energy storage. So I think we should be much more ambitious in terms of defining the role of international cooperation here.
And I think that's a very valuable contribution, and I think Paul Durant in a moment can respond to that. If we move to science and innovation, so the moderator was Arash Asami, please.
Thank you. Yeah, during this session, there are actually not mentioned in this chart two worrisome things that I wanted to share. And one of them is that currently 42% of all wind energy related patents are only held or are applied for by only 5 companies, which depicts a very strong concentration of knowledge within only a few institutions, and where I believe that this is actually losing opportunities, especially for the regions that need them the most. And also, although innovation is important, you may wonder if patents in the old form as we know it are the solution. They may be protectionistic in nature. On the other hand, we also saw examples of, for instance, CERN that are only patenting when it is necessary for knowledge transfer. And they are very much on the road of open access publications, open source software, and even open hardware. And I believe that these are actually, they're giving way to create pathways where we can ensure wealth and progress through continuous and open collaborative development.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Then on the electric highways, the moderator was Professor Mark Howell.
Thank you. So I'll avoid any acronyms and so on. But just to make some, with reference to the first column over there, but maybe a couple of key things that came out was that, you know, we're in a relatively fast-moving space, and perhaps there has to be some effort at designing a system that will learn. There are a lot of different potential configurations of supergrids and how those may interact with large variable intermittence and smart grids on the other side. And it seemed pretty clear that the standards weren't in place to enable all of these systems to potentially talk well to each other, and at the same time it was important to try and think about standards that don't lock us in. And again, reference was made to some first early movers where maybe standards limited freedom to develop, but rather they were set up to provide an ecosystem so things could develop. So you could have large-scale aggregators entering the system quickly and interacting quickly with system operators and so on. And then there was an important point about looking at robust decisions to invest in large infrastructure. Mention was made also of storage being thought of as large infrastructure, but clearly there are some investments that just enable the betterment of the entire system, and getting a better dialogue between policymakers and analysts seemed to be something that folks thought was important. So you could see the value of a supergrid beyond digging a large hole in the ground connecting a couple of countries, but in terms of the benefits for services for customers.
Thank you very much for that. And then the final one where I want to focus is reliability and quality, and Stefan Zenger was the moderator. Can we have a microphone on that side, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dolph. The summary reflects very well the discussions. What I think could be kind of added to that is with regard to kind of exciting developments. The overall exciting development that also came out of our session was that it becomes obvious that more and more countries are becoming aware of the need for a quality infrastructure and for robust standards and also appropriate standards. On the one hand, because we hear complaints from more and more countries that there's a lack of quality. So that's on that kind of consumer side. Governments are also wondering, coming up with how can we deal with certain, not only technical aspects. So there's a kind of really strongly increasing interest due to the increase in numbers in countries that are using now and applying renewable energy technologies. The constituencies which we feel the impact, of course, it's right answer global, but I think it's important to mention especially that the users, the end users of the technologies will be the main beneficiaries, and of course, if they benefit, and then they also users in the sense of investors, if they have more confidence in the products, then of course also the whole supply chain will benefit from that. So I think a small focus should be here on the users, the end users, and end users in a very broad sense. That came also out of some of the presentations. What can go wrong, especially for investors, but investor can be people like you and me with a solar home system, up to very large investment. With regard to a role for international cooperation, I think it's very clear, and that's not for the first time discussed here, that there is a need for harmonization indeed. That's certainly the very big topic. Something that has been mentioned here as well, that's kind of the negative way of harmonization, of a lack of harmonization, that standards should not be a barrier for renewable energy deployment. Sometimes because some standards don't fit together. There is sometimes a lack of coherence between different standards. Sometimes because standards are applied nationally in contradiction to other countries, or sometimes even set up as artificial barriers like trade barriers. So this part of the kind of the positive side, harmonization, should be taken into account. This is certainly where we can also see where ARENA can play a very positive role.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the additions to the summary of the deep dive sessions. And now we move to the second part of this session. If you have any additional thoughts, think about it, keep them now. There will be another round where you can bring them to the table in the third part. Second part is now two contributions on, okay, we have all these findings. How now do we translate them into action? And for that, we have two speakers that can respond to what kind of international initiatives are ongoing, and how could this fit in. The first one will focus on mission innovation. So that is a new initiative that was launched at the last COP. I will hear from Paul Durant, who is the head of Energy Innovation Policy in the UK, Department of Energy and Climate Change. And he's responsible for the UK energy innovation programs, and he's also closely involved in the EU set plan steering committee. So Paul, I invite you to the lectern.
Well, thank you, Dolf. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you everyone for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. Unfortunately, I've not been here all week, but from what I've seen today and from the conversations I've had in the margins, and indeed the summary that we've just seen, it sounds like you've had an excellent series of conversations and really delved into some issues. What I'm going to do in the next 10 to 15 minutes or so is to give you a bit of an overview of what mission innovation is and how it's developing. And then towards the end of the presentation, I'll try and circle back to some of the points you just heard and give you some of my thoughts on how your insights can help us in mission innovation as we develop the next phase. So firstly, I think some of you may have heard of mission innovation. It was launched with quite a high profile, but you may not be clear on what it's actually translating into. So let me try and offer you some insights into that. So mission innovation was a high profile international initiative. It's all about strengthening international clean energy research, development and demonstration with the goal of making clean energy widely affordable. It's very much about cost reduction at its heart. It was launched with much fanfare by Obama, Modi, Hollande and various other heads of government, including the UK Prime Minister, on the first day of COP21 in Paris. So it was very much a high-profile initiative and was one of the things in Paris that people pointed to as an example of the change of attitude that led to that excellent Paris Agreement. Actually, let me just digress slightly before I move on there. I've been involved in energy innovation for quite a long time now, and I have never seen energy innovation, energy research and development having such a high profile with politicians. It's always been valued, but the focus tended to be on deployment, the focus of let's get these technologies out there and people. The innovation part was slightly underrepresented. That really does seem to have changed. The message we're receiving from politicians, certainly in the UK, but I think this is far more widely felt, is that they've twigged to the fact that we're going to need some pretty substantial improvements in these technologies over the next couple of decades if we're going to achieve our objectives, and we really need to focus on our research and development. There seems to be a change of mindset, and I see that as extremely positive. And the Mission Innovation Initiative is an example of the fruits of that. So, there were two parts to mission innovation. Firstly, and this is really at the heart of it and was the big announceable and is the thing that we absolutely have to maintain, is that each of those 20 countries have pledged to double their public funding for relevant clean energy R&D over the next 5 years. So by the time that we get to approximately 2020, each of those countries will be spending twice as much per year as they do right now. Now, those 20 countries between them represent something like 75% of the world's carbon emissions, 80-something% of the world's current spend on energy R&D. So if those 20 countries double their spend, then the world has pretty much doubled its spend. So it's a very positive step in the right direction. In early June, ministers are getting together in San Francisco and will be announcing more details of those total funding commitments. And the goal is to try and hold everybody to those promises and make sure that they are honoured. A key thing to bear in mind, sometimes misunderstood, is that mission innovation doesn't have a budget of its own. Each country will be spending its money according to its own national decision-making processes. There's no pooling of funding into some massive pot. But what we are trying to do is to make sure that we work better together to ensure that money is wisely spent. There'll be a figure in June as to how much this all adds up to, but my personal guess, and I've not seen the final number yet, so it is a guess, is that by 2020 we'll be spending in excess of 20 billion, possibly slightly more than that, on clean energy R&D. Substantial investment that I would hope could make a good difference. So the second part, and this is where really a lot of the effort lies and is still a work in progress, is really about helping us spend that money wisely. So it's about fostering increased transparency and strengthening collaboration between those member states. And so as an aside, those are the world leaders as they gathered in Paris to make this announcement. So we have very much been in setup phase for the last 6 months or so, and at that June meeting coming up, we hope to transition more to a deployment phase. We've been exploring how to deliver a better shared understanding of where more effort and investment is needed, and some of the points I've heard here today are valuable insights into that. We want more and greater transparency of who's doing what progress is being made, and crucially, what remains to be done. We'd like to foster more collaboration between the public programs, be that bilateral collaboration between nations. We hope Mission Innovation can help facilitate those things, a bit of matchmaking between countries, but also between public and private investors. And this whole thing should be underpinned by what we hope will be a lean delivery process. So we're not in the process of setting up a big international institution to deliver this. The idea, and I'll circle back to this, is that we will deliver with and through existing organizations, and we very much hope that IRENA will be a partner in that. A parallel initiative that was also launched in Paris, which is separate to but has strong links with Mission Innovation, is the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. So again, you may have come across this. This was championed by Bill Gates. His personal pledge to double his personal investment, it's not Gates Foundation, it's his personal investment, in clean energy R&D from circa 1 billion now to circa 2 billion down the line. This is one individual. Impressive that he rivals the country investments. But he gathered together 29 high-profile investors, some very famous faces there, some very rich individuals who also pledged to increase their personal investments in this area, and crucially to work together and to work with governments to try and accelerate the flow of good ideas from the research sphere into deployment. So they too are in setup phase, so they're still talking about the detail. There's various details online, but they'll be announcing more later in the year. But their pledge is to invest more, unprecedented levels of crucially patient capital in technology development and commercialization. So they're intending to take a sort of longer term, more risk-based approach. I have to say that's a very exciting initiative, and let's hope they can deliver on those promises. So progress so far, just very briefly. It's early days, as I keep saying, but we've done a couple of things already. We've taken a look at best practices on collaborative initiatives, and we've got a paper that we'll be publishing on that. Lots of sharing of details of national programs and areas of potential collaboration. As somebody who's responsible for helping develop the UK's national program, I'm finding it hugely beneficial to have much better sight of what those other 19 countries are doing, and we can pick where we target our efforts far more effectively. It's an obvious step, but it's great that Mission Innovation is helping make that happen. We feel that we'll need some key insights into where we should target that investment. Now, there's a lot of excellent material out there. There's no shortage of analysis of energy innovation needs, including some excellent work from IRENA, work from the IEA and others. What we would like to do is to try and synthesize out from that existing work, what are the key things that we need to focus on? And we're talking to Dolph and his team and to others elsewhere about how best to do that. So I think I've largely covered a lot of this, and as already alluded to, so key meeting coming up at the end of the month, and there'll be more public announcements on the back of that. And that's when we transition, I hope, very much into the delivery phase, and conversations such as the one we're having here today will be really beneficial to that. So to circle back round then to some of the things that we've just been hearing, and again, this is a sort of initial reaction from me, and I'll want to take it away and digest it a little more, and I'm certainly very much looking forward to seeing the full written readouts of the conversations here today. So I've said already, Mission Innovation is really keen to work with and through other initiatives. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. The idea is that Mission Innovation can use its profile and, crucially, that political backing to help hopefully strengthen what's going on already and to build on that and identify areas where further work might be needed. As I say, IRENA we see as a key partner in the delivery of that, and very productive conversations so far about how the two initiatives can work productively together. A couple of things that we think that we can very usefully do fairly quickly, and Mission Innovation has this sort of big brand and this high-profile backing and access to ministers, access to senior and wealthy individuals in the private sector. What we want to do is to be able to communicate clearly to those senior decision makers a shared view of what's working right now, but crucially what still needs to be done. That information's out there. Many of you will probably know it, but that message is not necessarily getting through authoritatively enough to those senior individuals who are making key decisions. And we hope that Mission Innovation can help communicate that message. Secondly, we hope that Mission Innovation can use its brand and its convening power to encourage more engagement in existing collaborative programs, such as the ones run by IRENA and IEA. So just to pull out a few points from what I heard in the conversations and from the feedback that we'd seen. Firstly, a small negative, and then I'll get to positives. So a number of the recommendations that we saw there are really much about deployment and the challenges of deployment. Hugely important, absolutely. Also, deployment is a key pull factor for innovation. But Mission Innovation's role is really about getting things to TRL 8, and we'll leave it to other initiatives to worry about the deployment parts of that. Obviously, there needs to be an interface, but Mission Innovation's focus is primarily earlier. Picking up on some of the points, one of your slides there is about business models. I think it's fantastic that you actually had that as a specific subject. It does seem to be generally overlooked. So again, key principle in Mission Innovation is it's not just about the technology. Often the technology is at the heart of it, but we also are embracing innovation in processes, in business models, in system integration. So we see strong synergies with the slides that we saw there. Strong focus on cost reduction, that came up in a couple of the points of feedback that innovation, I mean, for us, it kind of boils down to the innovation at the heart of it is really about reducing the cost. We can kind of do most of the things we need to do, but the issue is usually cost. Sharing a best practice, again, that came up several times in the slides that you put up there. Mission Innovation is very a sort of intergovernmental initiative, so at national program level, so there's certainly a need to share best practice at national program level. I think some of those points were alluding to sharing best practice amongst researchers and innovators. I think we can help facilitate that, but it's more about championing it at the national level. Sharing information on objectives and targets, so greater clarity and greater shared communication of those objectives and targets. I think it came out in a couple of the slides, and we wholeheartedly agree with that. I do think that's where Mission Innovation can add some value. We can try and bring those 20 countries together to help them have, firstly, a better shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and then hopefully communicate that. And that, if those 20 countries can do that, then you've got a big proportion of the world's investment. Standards development. So absolutely buy into the importance of that. I don't think it's something that Mission Innovation itself can really get much traction on, but it is certainly something that we can call out and highlight the need for, and use again that brand and senior access to emphasize the importance of it. I'm nearly done now. So tracking and reporting progress. Again, focus on the program level. And we're still in setup phase, but as we move into the next phase of work, we'll need to put in place processes for understanding where we're trying to get to, but also, and then by implication, what progress are we making. I think one of the slides alluded to developing better methodologies in that space, and that would be extremely welcome, because I think we lack the effective tools at the moment to do that, so it feels like an important point. So before I just say thank you for your attention, one other point. So I was very much struck by the first column in the slides, which highlighted interesting, exciting things that are emerging. That's exactly the sort of thing that it's really useful to be hearing about. I wasn't clear whether those are things that you think are happening anyway, or whether they're things that you think more work is needed on. If it's the latter, then that's exactly the sort of steer that mission innovation countries would like to hear. These are the things where more work is needed, where more innovation is needed, more investment is needed, and that we can target our efforts accordingly. So let me draw a line at that point. I'm sure there'll be opportunity for questions later. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was very interesting. And I think the timing of this meeting is excellent as we move into that ministerial in a couple of weeks. As a second input for this discussion, we want to move to climate. Of course, there is a huge drive now to solve the climate problem, and we've heard many times over the last 3 days that renewable energy has to play a key role in that. You can also turn that around. If the climate problem needs to be resolved, then how can that framework be used to further develop these issues on renewables that have been discussed here in the last couple of days? On that, we'll hear from Dr. Matthew Kennedy, who is the chair of the UNFCCC Climate Technology Center and Network. That network is part of the technology mechanism of the UNFCCC, and the countries can tap into that to get expertise and to help them in developing also mitigation plans, but of course Matthew will further elaborate on that. He was also he's lead European negotiator for technology at COP21, and he is the chair of the IEA RETD, Renewable Energy Technology Deployment Program. And he works on strategy and business development in the International Energy Research Center. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dolph, and thank you to your team for this kind of invitation to speak on behalf of the Climate Technology Center and Network. Really what I'm going to do is try to introduce the CTCN as it is, talk about some of the work that it's going to do in R&D specifically and responding to the needs of developing countries, and then try to link into what I've been listening to in terms of the sessions here today and yesterday, and generally draw some conclusions. So as a quick introduction to this CTCN, well, firstly, it falls under the UNFCCC, so the UN Climate. We're very acronym heavy in terms of the UN, so I'll try to not use too many, but in general there was a mechanism that was established in 2009 that had two arms. The first one was a policy arm, which is the Technology Executive Committee, and the second one is more an operational arm, which is the CTCN. The first myth is that the CTCN is not a financial entity. So straight away, we do have finance that comes from donor countries, but we are not a financial entity in terms of we don't pay for project development like Global Environment Facility or any of the Asian African Development Banks or the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development or the GCF. We're based in Copenhagen. We're an infant in many ways with this staff of around 10 people, and we began operations roughly 2 years ago. The interesting thing about the model is that the CTCN has a number of consortium partners. So, for example, the main hosts are a combination of the UN Environment Programme and the Industrial Development Programme, UNIDO. And they work very closely with partners in a consortium that exists throughout the world. So in Europe, it's ECN. In the States, it's NRAIL. In Asia, it's AIT. In Anteri, in Africa, it's ENDA. So there's a number of different organizations that are involved in bringing expertise. Alongside that, it is trying to build some knowledge and provide technical assistance. So it utilizes a network of around 150 organizations to share experiences. And I'll talk a little about that now. But really what the work that the CTCN is doing is about providing information, helping countries to build the capacity within their countries, and building some technical expertise within those countries also. So what is it about doing? So it's really about bridging the gap. It's very clear, certainly in my experience of under the UN, that there are a number of projects, whether they emanate now from INDCs or NDCs as they will be, or whether they emanate from technology needs assessments. In general, those projects formulate themselves into project ideas, but those ideas don't necessarily get funded. In fact, in my experience is very few of them get funded. So what the CTCN is doing is providing technical assistance as a way of bridging the gap, helping a project idea improve and become funded. It's about supporting developing country parties, and it's really about supporting the countries as they go about implementing what they have said they would do under the 2015 agreement, which is about low carbon transitions, decarbonisation. The most important thing here is that the ideas that the CTCN will assist countries with emanate from those countries themselves. This is a bottom-up, country-driven process, and I'll touch on that in a second. What we're trying to do in terms of core service is something that the UN is predominantly not so good at, which is about involving the private sector. So working with public money, working with private investment to support countries. When I talk about technical assistance, it's about the ideas, the project ideas that get the requests that are made to the CTCN for assistance. So we have over 100 now. At our last advisory board meeting in Vienna, we hit the 100 threshold with response plans to around 60 countries. Those countries are mainly, least developed countries are small island development states, predominantly Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the island nations. It's about building capacity. So we have a number of designated entities within countries, similar to the focal point or similar to the GCF entity, where the request comes from. It emanates from them in their generally role with government, and that request is submitted to us in Copenhagen. We have a number of fora who congregate together based on Francophile or Anglophile, different types of fora in Africa, Asia, Latin America. And we have an incubator program to accelerate the development in terms of skills and expertise of staff within the various countries. And we, through our consortium members, deliver webinars. So when it comes to R&D, just before COP21, the members of the advisory board of the CTCN, which is made predominantly up of government, but you also have a research representative, you have an environmental NGO representative, and a business representative. Identified the challenge within countries in terms of a research and development or an innovation perspective. Now, there were previous references to this in terms of UNFCCC, which was about building native or endogenous capacities, as they call it. It's about the importance of making the CTCN operational to enhance R&D and diffusion, facilitate RD&D. So really the objective of strengthening innovation within countries, building national systems of innovation and enhancing those has been around before the Paris Agreement. But in Paris, it requested the technology mechanism to do some further work in regard to RD&D. So what does that mean for us going forward? As I mentioned, we met last month to explore what generally what the next steps would be. We're going to collaborate with the policy arm, and really what we're going to try to do is to enhance action that prioritizes the technologies that are replicable, scalable, whatever term you wish to use. So to date, we only have two requests with a clear RD&D focus, one coming from Indonesia and one coming from Colombia. So the Indonesian one is about AD, anaerobic digestion, and the Colombian one is about a biological treatment pilot project for waste emanating from their national mitigation action. There are 10 others with a potential marginal RD&D component within them. So that graph might not be very clear to you, but these are the requests. So you can see that we're on an upward trajectory. So we've been building expectations, building momentum, and trying to manage and match the expectations of the developing countries. We have around 106 applications in now, so you can see the curve is going the right way. The requests are predominantly if you look at the pie chart here, the requests are predominantly coming from Africa, the green part being Asia. So we have a very clear knowledge management system that's we're presenting to our website as a way of trying to target the various countries, over 174 which have signed. We have, as it says here, you can explore the requests that we've received, you can explore the status of them, where they are, what technologies they're focusing on. Once the request goes through the process, we also publish it, and you can explore the various network members. The intent is that an idea generates itself within a developing country, a request is made to the CTCN, and the implementer of that request is emanating from the region in which the request is made. So it's about building capacity within those various countries. So when we talk about the types of requests and how they affect some of the work that Irina are doing in terms of the technical assistance that we provide, there's a number of countries that I've extracted some information on. So what we're doing with Gambia is about greening the national economy, the localization of renewable energy technologies, and mainly a promotional role. In Algeria, there's a couple of different applications in. One is about accreditation of quality control of PV modules. In Tanzania, it's about, again, solar PV technology, promoting the sustainable use of that above other fossil-based technologies. In Benin, it's a feasibility study and an action plan to provide, to promote the manufacturing of various components within wind energy. Uganda, it's about geothermal. In Iran, it's about CHP. So not only are the countries diverse, their requests are diverse, the technologies are diverse, it goes across adaptation and mitigation, and it goes across the various suite of renewable energy technologies that Irina are focusing on. So where are we now? We're trying to identify what countries' needs are in terms of what the requests they're going to make. We're looking at technology needs assessments and the technology action plans. We see in the action plans, Bangladesh has an interest in establishing an agricultural R&D center. We see that across the various action plans that we've looked at, that there is an RD&D component. Almost all of them have a marginal RD&D component. And that move to deployment is critical not just the demonstration of a technology, but the deployment of that also. So in terms of the consortium that I mentioned, a lot of them are research-based organizations, or they have intelligence and they have a background that can bring expertise and transfer knowledge to developing countries. And there's also a number of network organizations. Predominantly, 1/4 of them are categorized as either research or an academic institution. So this is all about not only technology transfer, it's our technology assistance to enable technology transfer, but it's about information dissemination and sharing. So in terms of the key messages, I'm coming to an end. Really, it's about, as I mentioned, technical assistance. So finance, of course, is a barrier. Once finance is achieved, but really it's the step before that. Once the project is at a suitable scale, is written in a way that considers economic viability, environmental viability, social viability, then it will enable itself with some technical assistance to be funded by the various funding streams. Hard and soft technologies are included in the type of work that we're looking at, and from including pilot demonstration. And really it's about overcoming barriers. It's about helping to develop those national systems of innovation within countries. So in listening, certainly this morning I was pretty active in the decentralized distributed grids workshop, very interesting, and listening to some of the feedback that's coming from the various sessions. There's a number of different things where technical assistance to a country is completely aligned with some of the key findings that are coming out from the last 3 days' work. Similar to Paul, business models seem to feature predominantly in a lot of the areas. So I'm extracting things like tariffs, business models, different types of financing in terms of the types of technologies, whether they're grid or storage. Or D&D, of course, and the role that it will play, having a frame within the COP21 agreement. Anything relating to standards, emission standards. We were talking about electric vehicles, but it generally standards across the gamut of the technologies. Regulatory frameworks. So this type of enabling environment that people were referring to. M&V, monitoring and verification, a key aspect under the UNFCCC. Socioeconomic frameworks. The more active consumer, this is something that was featured a lot this morning when we talk about grid and microgrid and having an active consumer. Again, flexibility, demand side, cooperation in terms of planning, so building some knowledge and resource at a local level to help in terms of energy planning and the development of schemes and quality assurance and standards. So a lot of what my expectation is, the findings of what's happening over the last number of days, I'm going to bring them to the advisory board, disseminate them through the national designated entities as they meet regionally, with the expectation that some of these types of projects the requests will come into the CTCN. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Matt, for that overview and how it could, of what the CTCN is doing and how that could link up with what we have discussed here. May I invite the three of you now to the podium. We are going now into the third and last part of this session, and in part one there were still a few hands open of people who had additional comments. I suggest we start there.
Thank you very much. Very fascinating presentations, I must say. My comment is related to one of the earlier slides you had put up from the deep dive sessions, number 7. There was one point which was made on harmonization. While we need a lot of different kinds of harmonization in this world, including political harmony and peace and so on, I thought that point was related to standards and quality assurance, if it needs clarification.
Yes, we'll keep that in mind. The harmonization, as you quite rightly point out, it is technical standards, but it is also laws that have to be harmonized, market access rules have to be harmonized. There are a number of areas where that has to happen, and it needs to be clear to which innovation, which type of harmonization is necessary and who can deliver it.
Thank you.
Any other comments or thoughts? Please.
Small question actually. So the slides of these deep diving sessions, so is there any plan to share them with the audience?
Yes, we will make them available soon. I think next week we can make them available.
Thank you.
Okay, then a question from my side. So, and I think it's for the both of you. We've heard now on two initiatives under the climate agreement that focus on R&D. One is big country type of approach. The other one is more a process-oriented type of approach, building in small projects. Is there any interaction between both? Any coordination? Or is there a clear split that one is energy and the other is not energy? Or how will that work?
So, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think the quick answer is that it's still too early days to have sort of clear lines of demarcation. As I alluded to in my presentation, Mission Innovation is really about bringing national governments together and trying to strengthen existing organizations and implementation routes. And in that context, I can see strong synergies with the work that the network is doing. My sense of it, and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's much more about engaging with developing countries and building capacity. From what I heard there, it's not the sort of thing that Mission Innovation will be doing, but it's the sort of thing that Mission Innovation can provide assistance to. So there feels to be some good synergies there, to my mind. So.
I think certainly from my side, the CTCN can be seen as something that is bottom-up, something that is country-driven. But that is the way that the parties have asked for it. That's the way that it has evolved. But there is a very clear link now between technology and finance. Next week, there's going to be a session in Bonn on linking finance with technology. So that would mean potentially that the CTCN is having very clear communications with the GEF with regard and the Green Climate Fund. The projects that are coming in from countries are organizations that potentially are also are gaining from Mission Innovation. Those projects that go into the GCF, there is a role really for the CTCN potentially in helping to strengthen and provide technical advice and solutions to those types of projects before they get funded by the GCF. So it's about strengthening. So that more is at a macro level. So they much larger type initiatives that get submitted to the GCF. At the moment, in terms of financing, the financing for the CTCN comes from governments, but it's not necessarily sustainable. So we are looking to have a very clear technology role under the GCF's type of activity, and we're trying to show our suite of offerings that we can provide to the GCF. So that might involve us moving into a more macro role in terms of technology provision and assistance. But again, it's very early to say it, but those interactions are ongoing at the moment.
A lot of the discussions over the last 3 days focused on not so much technology innovation, but market innovation, policy framework innovation, business model innovation, process innovation. How do we get that to the market? Is there a role for governments? And how do we organize that internationally? Who wants to take that?
Question. I don't think I can give it a full answer, but I'll dance around the issue a little bit. So, as I alluded to in my presentation, that we are keen that mission innovation isn't only about technology. I mean, technology will be at the heart of the work that we do, and will be the sort of the touchstone that we keep reverting to. But as many people have often observed, you can't consider technology in isolation. And so the sorts of innovation needs that we will highlight, and then the sorts of innovation programs that we hope to facilitate, and the collaborations between countries on those areas should embrace that broader definition of clean energy innovation. Technology at the heart, business models associated with making effective use of that technology, processes associated with making the technology work in the real world, all of that is within scope. There's other stuff out there like market innovation and so on. That is not for mission innovation. I don't think that's very much more focused on the policy side. But there are other initiatives like the Clean Energy Ministerial, for example, which will also be meeting at the end of this month, who are taking an active interest in that and looking at ways in which they can foster more, at least exchange of information between countries, but ideally more collaboration as well. So part of the problem, yes, is for us, other bits for other people.
I think certainly from my side, the innovation comes from the market. You know, it comes from industry, sometimes collaborating with academia or sometimes collaborating with other industry. The role of government there then is to set the right framework or the rules where that can flourish. Whether that's about innovative financing that can be aimed at low carbon development from an innovation perspective, or whether it's just policy certainty and providing the right framework for innovations to be developed and to flourish, or whether it's about providing subsidy, tax breaks or tariffs in terms of overcoming some of the challenges with regard to low carbon, or just taking them away from the incumbents in terms of fossil. So it's really, for government, it's about stimulating the environment whereby industry and academia can develop the innovations.
I think this is all exactly right, but the policymakers have another challenge. The energy transformation is essentially something where we have engaged and we know in which direction we want to change the energy system and all that depends on the energy system without actually knowing what the end point will look like. We don't know the exact technologies that will be providing the energy and how they will be regulated, how they will make money. We don't actually know how the different markets will be interlocking. And for policymakers who come from a tradition, specifically in the energy sector, of very long investment cycles, so therefore very long certainty of legal frameworks, of regulatory frameworks, to them it is very uncomfortable suddenly to be managing a system that needs constant management. It's an adaptive management of the policy process, and every single political system in the world, except perhaps the US, China, and the European Union as the biggest one, is simply not capable of doing that on its own. It reduces the risk for everybody to share information about successful policy innovation, successful changes in the market frameworks that then allow new business models to emerge or whatever works to be shared by others so that it can be adapted to other legal systems, other economic circumstances. Is this policy learning that needs to happen, and it has particular value in an area where there is so much uncertainty because we are trying a transformation where we don't know the end point.
I think you're completely right, and having policymakers are constantly now looking to evidence that is reliable and accurate and timely. So a lot of the work actually that's coming out of Irina and Dov's team is about presenting that evidence about what is working within various jurisdictions and how that can be translated into other jurisdictions. It's about an understanding of not only barriers but also the costs associated with one technology over another to allow policymakers to start thinking in the medium to longer term like the way that they would have done on a fossil-based infrastructure. So I think having more intelligence in the system, policymakers are seeking that. They're looking for that type of information to make decisions that have an impact, because they know that if they choose one plant over another plant, they don't get an opportunity to change for another 20 or 25 years, if not longer.
There's a question.
I'm struck by what an absolutely interesting workshop this has been, in this session in particular, bringing together a lot of moving parts of a puzzle that's kind of assembling itself as we go along. And one thing I wondered about generally is, does this mean that there would be a new kind of engagement on capacity building? I mean, we understand, and I think the penultimate speaker just touched on some of these things that are important. We're in a dynamic policy environment, and somehow having information that can get to policymakers quickly so they can make informed decisions seems sensible on the one hand. So do you see there being an importance to build capacity for energy planning and policy development that comes on the back of that, given this changing field? Because I guess that's needed before you get active engagement from many of your constituents. And then secondly, I wonder if there's space for capacity building for the poor technocrat who's sitting back in his office and is getting bombarded by tons of amazing information and different organizations with different foci and so on. And at some point, he's just got to get on and do his work. And if there's some way of navigating through all of these different initiatives, and I'd like to stress that this is non-trivial. We have one initiative that's talking about bottom-up, engaging academia and so on. Another one where I guess the primary entry point is through ministerial meetings, and so on and so on and so on. So it's not very clear how one might navigate through this system quickly to take advantage of the fantastic effort that's clearly being put together. Thank you.
I'll try to respond. Firstly, in terms of capacity building, you're completely right. The Climate Technology Centre network might be framed as an arm under a technology mechanism, but fundamentally it's about capacity building. It just so happens that the end product is technology, or the service is for technical assistance. If you think about the way that the UNFCCC, the climate side of it, it always thinks in terms of means of implementation, how you go about getting the climate change reward at the end. And that's linking capacity building, technology and finance. It has always struggled to link the three together. And really what the CTCN is trying to do is to be a mechanism to link the three together. Now it's a challenge and it's very small, and the impact that it would have in finance terms is very marginal. But it is actually quite resource heavy in terms of personnel to do such training. And in terms of responding to your question about the technocrats, your word, not mine, let's say, for all government in the room, one of the things that the very first thing when the CTCN was established was to ask each country to identify a national designated entity. Okay, so a person to go to where the request emanates from, and that gets submitted to the CTCN. We're very clear that unless that entity has the appropriate skills, knowledge, they can't make the submission. Or if they do, potentially they put a weak submission in that doesn't get funding, that jeopardizes a potential project development within their country. So what we're trying to do is, at a regional basis, to draw the national designated entities together to provide training. Now, that comes at a cost, for sure, but I'll give you an example. So I was in Bangkok late last year, where we brought together 25 of the countries from the Asian area, Southeast Asia, to provide training. And the training isn't just about how you submit a form. Like we had the World Intellectual Property Organization there talking about IP and providing guidance there. We had the Private Finance Advisory Network talking about how you broker a deal between a private investor and a public financier. And we're engaging very closely with the banks within those various jurisdictions to provide some information and guidance to that entity. Now, it isn't a capacity building for all government actors in every single developing country, but I think that if we hone in on building the capacity within one technocrat, that will allow potentially the project to happen and to be the request to be made to the CTCN.
Two things. Capacity building is not just something that has to happen in developing countries. In Germany, we have the need to build the capacity in the sort of automotive engineers and technicians that can service electric cars. I've just decided to support an initiative to do the same for boats, pleasure vessels that go on the Baltic Sea. The people who maintain boats also need to learn how to deal with electric engines in the future. But I think the challenge goes much deeper than all these details, which I trust we can solve. And that is, speaking about planning, planning used to be you set your objectives and then you trust that there is long-term certainty so that you can actually implement your plan. That is no longer the case. We are now planning in the energy system under conditions of very high uncertainty. So we have to plan for adaptation, we have to plan for flexibility. It's the sort of plan that starts like asking the question, what would a maverick do? You can't predict the future conditions, and it requires a very different planning skills and planning tools in order to do investment planning, in order to do operational planning, system development planning under those circumstances. It needs to work much more with scenarios, and it needs to have much more contingency planning rather than planning that actually assumes that the plan will be implemented later in a serial fashion. It's a completely new tradition in planning that we need to establish, and that is uncomfortable for people who are habituated in the old system.
Okay, we are the last question because we're already 5 minutes over time.
Okay, thank you. I would like to firstly congratulate you for these efforts to organize international technology transfer, and I think it's very important to push countries to, for example, double their energy research expenditure and organize technology sharing and help countries setting up their innovation systems and so on. But I think there's one elephant in the room that needs to be addressed, that we're talking here about partly global public goods, right? The owners of technologies usually are private companies. And I mean, someone mentioned the example that kind of wind patents are owned basically by 5 companies or so. I think that is holds for all areas of technology. And as we know from medical research, for example, there's lots of money goes into treatments that are important for rich countries but not for poor countries and so on. So probably much less money goes into small island states, grid development or so as compared to kind of solutions in the US. So countries have their own interests and companies have their own interests. And I think what we need to do is look at the whole thing from a global public good perspective and see who organizes research that is important also for developing countries with little R&D budget, or for goods where the commercial use is not immediate or so. No? And if we look at HIV/AIDS, for example, we have agreements, global agreements to make HIV/AIDS medication available for poor people, no? Through kind of specific licensing agreements or so. I think that kind of research governance for global public goods is something that we really need to seriously address. And that's probably, I mean, CTCN, for example, I think we'll find it difficult probably to convince private sector patent owner to share their patent technology. I mean, what you can share is how to set up an innovation system, but not kind of sharing kind of privately owned patents. I think we need to think more about these global public goods characters, right? The German Development Institute, where I'm working, coordinated a research report which was edited as an OECD report on research governance for global public goods. And there we looked at international experiences of kind of from different domains of how that can be organized. I think we need to think more in that direction and really address this issue of incentives for the private sector. And the question would be, for example, whether the Breakthrough Energy Coalition addresses these things also, whether they kind of would be considering, for example, to put up a global fund or so for that kind of, for example, to subsidize licensing agreements that are pro-poor. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Let me offer a personal view. I'll caveat it as immediately a personal view. I agree wholeheartedly with you. It is something that is being discussed amongst at least some of us in mission innovation. And in fact, a sort of early concept of mission innovation is that it would be very much about a mission that is driven by those public goods. I think some of us still hold out the hope that mission innovation can help facilitate that. And I don't recall if it was yourself, certainly somebody earlier on suggested, a challenge, a grand challenge around energy storage and so on, and trying to identify those challenges and corral a number of different countries, some degree of pooling of funding, to deliver something that is in the interests of the world as a whole, but maybe no individual country can justify that level of investment, is something that many of us aspire to. And the mission innovation gives us a framework where we can at least explore those things, and at least, I would hope, gives us a chance of trying to pull that together in a couple of areas. Guess watch this space. Let's see if we can deliver on that. I caveat that as a personal view only, but we'll see how it develops.
I think what you're raising two critical things. The first one is this idea of what programs are there for countries in Africa to do R&D. So, you would have in Europe, you have Horizon 2020, you have the equivalent in the US, you have the equivalent in Japan, but what is there? And I think that was the driver that led to R&D being in the agreement. Now, what that means, we're going to probably find out in the next couple of weeks in Bonn when everyone meets to talk about it. But in general, I think there is a significant gap there in terms of how does a country like Senegal or how does a country like Laos engage in R&D, okay, at an international basis. The second point you talk about really is about, in many ways, IP, okay, patent protection, whatever way you want to call it. And I've argued this very clearly under the Technology Executive Committee under the UN Climate, that it is not IP isn't an inhibitor to innovation. In fact, it's something that stimulates innovation. Now, of course, all these discussions happen under WTO and TRIPS and all these different things. But if I've asked centres like the South Centre or where innovation is happening in South-South cooperation to give me examples of where IP has been a barrier. And I haven't seen any. I'm sure they're there, but they're not as numerous as people cite them as being. Now, you have to also remember that if you want to get the technology transfer, if you want to get that level of engagement in countries like Africa, in countries like Asia, in terms of the TRIPS agreement, Africa is exempt till 2021 in terms of patents and IP. And it will be an exempt way beyond 2021 as well. So it isn't a barrier for Africa. It's a barrier for emerging countries, emerging economies that are looking to build a manufacturing base to catch up with the developed countries, of the world. That's certainly what I'm seeing, at least. But in terms of IP, we very clearly bring people like WIPO and WIPO Green and the information that comes from the Intellectual Property European Patent Office, constantly providing information to developing countries about how they would go about licensing and registering, but generally that is the level of knowledge that's to be communicated. But in terms of a barrier to tech transfer, the evidence isn't citing it yet, but it is citing it in terms of the emerging economies.
Just one very quick point that I forgot there. In terms of managing expectations, I don't think the Breakthrough Energy Coalition is the body that will deliver what you're referring to. They are quite clear that it's not a philanthropic undertaking. They're about getting a return on their investment. So.
Very good. That concludes this session. I thank very much the panelists. So we've heard now a little bit about how to translate all these findings into action. We will reconvene at 3 o'clock in 20 minutes, and then we'll talk about the group sessions and how what we can draw from that. So thank you very much.